Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Texas City Tales podcast. My name is Ramari,
I'm Jennifer.
and today we have Miss Theresa Mayfield, our local history librarian at the Moore Memorial Library.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, can you tell us a little bit about this African American project that you're working on?
Yeah, so we're working on what we're calling the African American Experience Texas City Oral History Project. And we're using oral histories as a way to capture the narrative of the community, to sort of give us an idea of the stories, events, people, places, times that took place between 1940 and 1970.
How long have you been working on this project?
Well, we've been working on it for quite a while. In the middle of, we started this in 2020, and the pandemic started.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to sort of put it on hold. But in the meantime, we did our best to try to interview people, and we have a number. We have about 11 folks who we've interviewed. We have 2 more that we will interview, so that would make it about 13. And yeah, we're super excited. We can't wait to finally have it done, or at least a portion of it will be, I guess,
Available to the public?
yes, available to the public the middle of February.
Oh, nice.
So how did this come about? Like, what was the inspiration and how did it start?
So our library realized that there was a gap in the archive, meaning we had very little information about the Black community. We had a couple of boxes, a couple of folders, but that was it. And we thought using oral histories would be a great way to capture stories about the community, which we couldn't use or capture with pictures or other kind of documentation.
So, what kind of questions did you ask these?
We asked them so where they were born, who their family was, where they go to school, what their aspirations were. We wanted to know what it was like during the civil rights era. We asked lots of information regarding their families, what it was like living in Texas City during that time. That was a big one. What it was like going to school at Booker T. Washington. That was a big one also. So the types of questions related to job opportunities, social and community life, again, schools and education, disasters, that was a big one. The Black churches in the neighborhood, Black political involvement, and we gave everyone a general standard list of questions that we asked.
So I know you said you've interviewed 11 people so far, with a couple more to come. Are there any names that you remember or that we might recognize? Some kind of pillars of the community?
Yep, we have Thelma Bowie, and we have Dr. Lynn Ray Ellison. We have Reverend Deanne Benford. We have maybe names that we don't know, but the community would know, would be Daisy Bell Buster, Vera Bell Gary. I mean, we're including both East and West Texas City. The Mays family, Curtis and Beatrice Mays, Betty Jones, Martha Darden, Mary Parker, Bernice Hall, and then we have some others that we'll be adding to that list very shortly.
Interesting. So, what was maybe one of the interesting things that you learned while conducting these interviews that you didn't know from looking at pictures or?
Well, you know, I
books?
didn't know that they had sit-ins during a couple of sit-ins during the civil rights era. That was really surprising. It was Daisy Bell Buster. She said that a pillar of the community, his name was Johnny Henderson, took her and a number of other students out, and they went to Wine Gardens, which was a place at that time. And they sat at the counter, and of course nobody served them. But it was very peaceful, right? The police showed up. Mr. Henderson said, "They're all with me," and he took them all back to school. I just was surprised to hear that there were sit-ins here when I hadn't heard of any of that before. And then also, there was a place called Wise's Barbershop. And so Mr. Wise was Wise Adams was his name. His daughter was Betty Jones, and she talks about how her father used his barbershop as a way to gather people and also discuss politics and to sort of convince people to vote. And back in the day, you had something called a poll tax.
Okay.
And so you had to pay in order to vote. And some people couldn't afford to do that. And others who were in the Black community really serious about the vote, said it's, basically your duty if you can, tried to convince them to vote, right? And so because voting was very important to the community, or having the right to vote was very important to the community.
Mm-hmm. Now that you've accumulated all of this information and you're still, I know, putting some more pieces into the puzzle, how will people be able to access it? Do they have to come into the library, or is this something that will be made available online?
Yep, it's going to be made available online, and folks will be able to read the transcription, but they'll also be able to see the video or listen to the audio, depending on how we did that oral history. They'll be able to search the oral histories, and we have a table of contents. They can search based on a topic, or they can search the entire oral history for information. What's really cool about how we're doing this is that we're using a platform called OHMS, and what it will do, it will allow us to incorporate maps, and also if there's any photos or any documentation into segments of the oral history. So while you're listening to the oral history and you're reading it, you can see a map that says, well, I lived at 301 South, right? And so you can see where on the map that actually is, right? And you can say my mom was so and so, right? And then if there's a picture of her, then we'll include a picture of her. It just adds more visualization to the oral history versus just listening to it.
That's a really neat element to
reading
it. Kind of adds a different layer to the whole thing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It adds a different layer. We're super excited.
So when do you think all of that would be available for people to start kind of digging into and learning more?
So we will have 3 released by mid-February. And then by Juneteenth, we'll have all of the oral histories made available to the community. And we will be happy to put on a really big fanfare, because I feel that this is a really important project for the community. And I want to make sure that we're really sharing it with everyone.
Definitely.
So can you tell us a little bit about who were the who's who of the community then, and then maybe even now?
Well, I don't know. So I was doing some research on that, right? And, Dr. Ellison is I would consider him a who's who, right?
Absolutely.
He and Thomas Carter were the first commissioners in Texas City. And they both became commissioners at the same time, the same year. So Dr. Ellison was District 3, Thomas Carter was District 1, but Dr. Ellison was the longest consecutive serving commissioner. He served for 22 years. And then another person I was thinking about was this guy named Charles Brown. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he was sort of a rhythm and blues singer. And there's a very popular song that everyone might have heard before, which is "Please Come Home for Christmas." And so I could sing it right now, but
ratings would skyrocket.
not my voice. But anyway, but he was also inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame by Bonnie Raitt. I don't know if you're familiar with her. So she's also like rhythm and blues rock singer, and she was instrumental in getting him into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And then, so recently I came across a gentleman by, his name is Rear Admiral O.C.V. Combs, Jr., and he went to Booker T. Washington from 1955 to 1964, but he graduated from Texas City High School. And he built Navy war submarines using the names like Houston and what was the other one? The other one, Dallas, right? And I don't know if you ever saw the movie Hunt for Red October. So both of his submarines were in that film. So it's just very exciting. But he was extremely intelligent. He is extremely intelligent. He's just one of the ones that we know very little about. But we will soon hopefully have an oral history on him as well. So stay tuned. Awesome. And then we have, currently, right, we have a couple who's who of Texas City, right? We have Miss Thelma Bowie, exactly, right? She's the first mayor pro tem, correct? Yeah. And who else do we have as who's who of Texas City now? If you can say.
We have our current mayor, so Mayor Dedrick Johnson, first African American mayor of Texas City.
Exactly.
We have assistant fire chief Dennis Harris. We had Mr. Robert Burby, who was the first African American police chief.
And we have Miss Ramari Lee across the table from me.
Yeah, I am the first African American woman city secretary for Texas City. So that's cool to know that not only do we have a rich history from the 40s to the 70s that is going to be done orally and we'll be able to access that online, but we also have, living history that's still working for the citizens of Texas City today.
Well, I wanted to kind of bring up one thing when we were talking about the gap and why I was surprised that we had a gap. But, going through these oral histories and talking to folks, I realized that they themselves had a gap, right? They didn't have pictures, or not many had pictures or documentation themselves. So how could they add to our archive, right? Because they just didn't have themselves. And so so this could explain the gap, why it may not have been an important practice to them during the 40s and 50s and 60s, keeping these kind of documentation.
So how did you go about finding some of these families?
Well, Dr. Ellison has been just an amazing person in this effort. He's introduced me to many, many people, and basically through him, I've been able to have these different interviews. He knows so many people in this community, really, and he's such a strong advocate for the Black community, and I don't think I could have done half of these without his help. He's wonderful. At the area that I think I wrote it down, was really small. I mean, we have Bay Street on one side, we have Texas Avenue. So Bay Street's on the west side, Texas Avenue's on the north side, 10th Street's on the east side, and then 4th Avenue's on the south side. So it's a really small area, and a small area that had one school and at least 3 churches, and the people were so tight-knit, and they raised such strong people, and not just to survive, but to thrive, right? Not just in that community, but out in the world. They wanted to give them as much guidance and education and strength of character as they could, because they knew that potentially they could be dealing with situations that might not be favorable, right? So, it just felt like a very happy community to grow up in. So I really enjoyed listening to these oral histories and giving these oral histories.
Something that you had mentioned the other day was like how important education was to a lot of these families and groups inside of this community.
Yeah, I mean, I can honestly say these students so respected their teachers. They really enjoyed going to school. They enjoyed sports. I mean, there wasn't one person that said, "Oh God, again, I have to get up to go to school." No, nobody in oral history said that. They, I mean, just they also felt that school was important, and I mean, sometimes they were just sad when they had to leave. When they were done with high school, they were just sad that they had to leave. So, I mean, and integration, for the most part, went fairly smoothly in Texas City. I mean, in 1960, they started this process of, okay, how can we do this, right? Maybe we start with the old, higher level grades, like 12th grade, 11th grade, 10th grade, right? And then work our way down. But by the end, in 1969, Booker T. Washington was closed, and so integration took place. There wasn't, I think they tried to do it where it was like 10th or 12th, 11th, 10th grade, but then they just did it. They just finished it. They just integrated it.
Interesting fact, Miss Carol Johnson was a part of the very first integrated graduating class of Texas City High School.
Oh.
And she just happens to be the mother of the mayor.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. It's like there were students who had a choice to integrate the first year. And I consider them brave, right? Because
Absolutely.
they weren't sure what they were walking into, right? And for the most part, I think that they all had a good experience. They had a good educational experience. The reason why they went to Texas City High School is they thought they would get a very good education there, right? New books, everything, right? And I mean, there's a small missteps here or there, but overall, I think that it was a smooth transition from one school to the next.
I know you do projects, all the time that involve history. This one seems like it means so much to you. Has that been the case?
Yep, it does. It means a lot to me because it's like such a proud community that I'm nervous, right? Because I want to make sure that their voices are heard how they want them to be heard, not how I want their voices to be heard, right? So I feel like it's super important, and I have such a deep respect for this community overall, and I want it to be done right, as much as I can.
Absolutely. We get that feeling
Yeah,
from you.
it does. It comes across.
I have this intensity sometimes. I don't know. But be careful.
It's not a bad thing. I mean, I think the job is in the exact right hands. You want somebody that feels the weight and the responsibility of that,
Yeah. Making sure it's done right.
Yeah.
And how you said, not making it into your own voice, but giving their voice
Yeah.
the justice that it deserves.
I cannot imagine, going through, so for example, integration. I can't imagine how strong you have to be, right, to take on that challenge, right? And so that's why it's so important, because these are strong individuals, right, that their voices are heard. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and explaining this project to us and giving us a little bit of history that we didn't have yesterday.
And for giving us this resource for the community to enjoy for years to come.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you to the City of Texas City for sponsoring this podcast. Thank you to Ms. Theresa Mayfield for taking time out to tell us about something wonderful coming to the city in the middle of February. If you have an entrepreneur, small business, industry person, or amazing thing that you would like to highlight on Texas City Tales, the podcast, please recommend it in the comments below. You can catch a new episode every Wednesday on the city's Facebook page, YouTube, or anywhere podcasts are streamed. Till next time.